Hey, so tonight we're going to talk about something a little different, something a bit grittier than the sanitized history books often portray. Forget the romanticized images of toga-clad philosophers calmly debating. We're diving deep into the strange, often brutal, and sometimes darkly humorous addictions that gripped the ancient Romans. You think you've got bad habits? Trust me, after tonight, your screen time addiction will look positively quaint. So, if you're finding this intriguing, please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Alright, find that cozy spot, pull the blankets up, and let's slip back 2 millennia into the very real, very human heart of Rome. Imagine, if you will, that you are not nestled safely in your soft bed, but instead, you are standing on the dusty, bustling streets of Rome, the year around 100 AD. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, charcoal smoke from street vendors, and the faint underlying stench of the Cloaca Maxima, the city's vast sewer system. The sounds assault your ears, the ceaseless clatter of carts on cobblestones, the shouts of hawkers, the laughter and curses of men gathered in alleyways. And if you listen closely beneath it all, you might catch the distinct rhythmic rattle of dice. You might think gambling is a modern vice, a quick swipe on your phone, a discreet trip to the casino. But for the Romans, it was an obsession, a fever that burned through all strata of society, from the lowliest plebeian to the most exalted emperor. This wasn't some polite game of chance played in hushed tones. This was raw, visceral, often illegal, and utterly pervasive. You'd walk past a tavern, and through the open door, you'd see men hunched over a table, their faces flushed with a mixture of hope and desperation. Their eyes, dark and intense, would be fixed on the tali, knuckle bones, often from sheep or goats, meticulously carved and weighted, or the more refined tesserae, actual six-sided dice, much like our own though made of bone, ivory, or even precious metals. The law, specifically the lex alaria, made most forms of gambling illegal, except during the Saturnalia festival, a brief window of sanctioned chaos. Did anyone pay attention to it? You would quickly realize the answer was a resounding no. The Romans, you see, had a peculiar relationship with laws they found inconvenient. They were circumvented, ignored, or simply paid off. So, the backrooms of taverns, the shadowy corners of the forum, even private homes became clandestine casinos. You'd hear tales of fortunes won and lost in a single throw, of men staking their inheritances, their slaves, even their own freedom on the capricious roll of the dice. Consider the atmosphere. Imagine the flickering oil lamps casting long, dancing shadows across the eager faces, the air thick with the smell of cheap wine and unwashed wool. The only light source might be a small, sputtering lamp, barely illuminating the rough wooden table. You can almost feel the tension in the room, a palpable hum of anticipation and anxiety. A man might slam his fist on the table, cursing the gods for a bad throw, while another lets out a triumphant roar, raking in a pile of small bronze coins. You see the veins bulging in their necks, the sweat beading on their foreheads, the sheer, unadulterated thrill of it all etched on their faces. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the rush, the fleeting moment of control over an uncontrollable fate, the tantalizing whisper of immense wealth, or crushing destitution, just a tumble away. The games themselves were simple, often variations of what we call hazard or craps. Tali involved throwing 4 knuckle bones with different combinations yielding different scores, and the Venus throw, all 4 bones landing on different sides, being the highest and most coveted. With tesserae, it was straightforward rolling of the dice, betting on the outcome. But the simplicity belied the profound emotional investment. For you, the stakes might be losing a few dollars on an app. For them, it could be the roof over their head or the respect of their peers. You might walk away from a lost bet and forget it by morning. For a Roman, a bad run could spiral into a lifetime of debt or worse, forced servitude. And it wasn't just the lower classes. Emperors themselves were notorious gamblers. Caligula, known for his extravagance and cruelty, was said to be so addicted that he would gamble away vast sums from the imperial treasury. He'd allegedly even cheat, rigging games or simply intimidating his opponents. Nero, another emperor known for his debauchery, also loved to gamble, as did Claudius, who was said to be so obsessed he wrote a book on dice playing. Imagine the absurdity. The most powerful man in the world, the ruler of an empire stretching from Britain to Egypt, is hunched over a table, frantically throwing dice, his mind utterly consumed by the pursuit of a fleeting win. It highlights a common thread through history, doesn't it? That even immense power and wealth cannot inoculate one against the insidious grip of addiction. You'd witness how this addiction permeated daily life. Men would skip work, neglect their families, sell off possessions, all for the chance to win big, to catch that elusive lucky streak. You'd see the telltale signs, the weary eyes, the frayed cloaks, the desperate pleas for loans from friends or strangers, the quiet shame that followed a night of heavy losses. Yet, despite the consequences, they kept coming back. Why? Because the thrill, that brief, electric surge of possibility, was too potent to resist. The mundane, often brutal reality of Roman life, the hard labor, the constant threat of disease, the strict social hierarchy, made the escapism of gambling all the more appealing. For a few fleeting moments, as the dice tumbled, a slave could imagine himself a rich man, a pauper a senator. It was a momentary inversion of their rigid world, a brief taste of unearned fortune. The Romans even devised elaborate systems to track their bets. They'd carve marks into tables, use abacuses, or simply rely on memory, though arguments over who owed what were common and often ended in blows. You can picture the heated arguments, fueled by cheap wine and frayed nerves, as two men dispute the outcome of a game, their voices rising to a shout in the smoky confines of the tavern. These weren't just games. They were intensely personal battles against fortune, against each other, and perhaps against themselves. And what did they bet on? Not just money. Sometimes it was food, a day's rations, or a share of wine. Other times it was more personal, a piece of jewelry, a fine cloak, or even a favored slave. The act of betting itself, the spectacle of the risk, was as important as the outcome. The onlookers too were drawn into the drama, their gasps and murmurs adding to the charged atmosphere. You standing there might feel a primal urge to join in, to experience that intoxicating blend of fear and excitement. It's a testament to the enduring power of chance, isn't it? The human desire to believe that fate can be swayed, that one lucky throw can change everything. So, as you drift back to your own time, remember those dusty Roman streets, the clatter of dice, and the desperate, hopeful faces illuminated by sputtering oil lamps. The next time you see a lottery ticket or an online poker ad, think of the Romans, long gone but forever bound by their own burning desire for a stroke of luck, a desire that often spiraled into an all-consuming, life-altering addiction. You might not be betting your freedom, but the impulse, the thrill, the ancient, enduring appeal of the gamble remains disturbingly familiar. Now let's peel back another layer of Roman life, one drenched in blood and applause, a spectacle so central to their existence that it bordered on a national addiction. Forget your comfy stadium seats and polite applause for a touchdown. You are not at a sporting event. You are about to step into the roaring heart of the Colosseum, or any one of the hundreds of amphitheaters scattered across the empire. The air here isn't just dusty, it's charged, electric, thick with the scent of unwashed thousands, sweat, fear, and a metallic tang that you'll soon recognize as blood. You push your way through the throng, jostling against men and women of every social standing, from the grand senator in his toga to the grimy plebeian in his tunic. The noise is deafening, a cacophony of shouts, jeers, cheers, and the constant buzz of anticipation. Imagine the sheer scale of the crowds. Tens of thousands of people, packed shoulder to shoulder, their eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and morbid curiosity. The sun beats down on the awning stretched across the arena, casting dramatic shadows. This isn't just entertainment, it's a profound social ritual, a collective outpouring of emotion that binds the city together in a shared, primal experience. You finally find your spot, perhaps on a hard stone bench, and look down into the arena. It's vast, covered in sand. The very word arena means sand, designed to soak up the inevitable. In the distance you see the fighters emerge, not the muscular oiled heroes of Hollywood, but grim, often terrified men, some slaves, some condemned criminals, some volunteers driven by desperation or a thirst for glory. They wear a variety of armor, each type a distinct class. The heavy Murmillo with his fish-crested helmet and large shield, the agile Retiarius with his net and trident, the fearsome Thraex with his small shield and curved sword. They are not just men, they are archetypes, symbols of courage, death, and the brutal whims of fate. The addiction here isn't just to violence, though that's certainly a major component. It's an addiction to spectacle, to the raw, unfiltered drama of life and death played out before your very eyes. You see the gladiator, a man stripped of his former identity, his face hidden behind a helmet, his fate hanging by a thread. He's not a sportsman. He's a performer in a terrifying, deadly ballet. When he enters, a hushed anticipation falls over the crowd, a momentary intake of breath before the storm breaks. Then, as the referee signals, the fight begins and the roar returns, multiplied 1,000-fold. You watch, captivated, as two gladiators circle each other, their movements precise, economical, honed by years of brutal training in the ludus, the gladiatorial school. The Retiarius darts and weaves, trying to ensnare his heavily armed opponent in his net, while the Murmillo lumbers forward, shield raised, looking for an opening to unleash a crushing blow. The clang of steel on steel rings out, sharp and discordant, punctuated by the grunts of exertion and the scrape of sandals on sand. You can feel the impact of every blow, the jarring reverberation of the strikes, even from your distance. You are not merely an observer. You are a participant, your emotions tied to the ebb and flow of the fight. The smells are intense. Beyond the crowd's odor, there's the distinct scent of sweat and blood, fresh and coppery. When a gladiator takes a hit, a gasp ripples through the crowd, and you see the dark stain spread on the sand. You might recoil, but you cannot look away. It's a morbid fascination, a primal engagement with the boundary between life and death. You feel the tremor of the ground as the combatants move, the collective surge of emotion from the crowd like a living wave. This isn't just about winning, it's about how you die, the courage you show in the face of inevitable defeat. A good death, even a losing one, could earn a gladiator respect, even posthumous fame, and it certainly earned the crowd's approval. And then comes the moment of decision. One gladiator is down, his weapon lost, his shield useless, perhaps gravely wounded. He looks up at the magistrate, the patron of the games, for judgment. And then you turn your gaze to the crowd. It's not the simple thumbs up or thumbs down you've been taught. It's a complex, often ambiguous gesture, influenced by the gladiator's performance, his courage, his injuries. A wave of hands, a roar of voices, some demanding mercy, some demanding the killing blow. You feel the pressure, the weight of collective will, the raw, unfiltered power of the mob. If the crowd wills it, if the patron agrees, the victor delivers the coup de grace, the blade plunging true. A collective gasp, then a roar of approval, and the body is dragged away, leaving a fresh trail in the blood-soaked sand. This isn't just a brutal spectacle, it's a profound psychological release for the Romans. Their lives, especially for the common people, were hard, often monotonous, and strictly ordered by social hierarchy. The arena offered a catharsis, a chance to collectively experience extreme emotions, fear, excitement, pity, bloodlust, that were otherwise suppressed. It was a potent drug, delivering an emotional high that few other forms of entertainment could match. You could lose yourself in the collective hysteria, forget your own troubles, and feel a sense of belonging to something larger and more powerful than yourself, the city of Rome itself. The addiction extended beyond merely watching. You'd see children playing gladiator in the streets, armed with wooden swords and makeshift shields. You'd see women obsessed with particular fighters, sometimes even leaving their husbands for them, drawn to their raw masculinity and the dangerous allure of their profession. Graffiti celebrating victorious gladiators would be scrawled on walls across the city, their names sung in taverns, their images etched into lamps and mosaics. These men, despite their often humble origins, were the rock stars of their age, objects of intense devotion and fascination. And the betting? Much like the gambling addiction, the gladiatorial games were a massive betting opportunity. You could place wagers on who would win, how long the fight would last, even how many blows would be struck. Imagine the tension as you watch your chosen gladiator fight, your fortune riding on his every parry and thrust. The stakes were high and the emotional investment even higher. You'd scream, you'd cheer, you'd curse, your voice hoarse from the effort, completely swept up in the drama. The emperors too were addicted to these games, but perhaps in a different way. For them, it was an addiction to power, to the adoration of the masses, to the spectacle of their own authority. By staging these colossal games, by providing the people with panem et circenses, bread and circuses, they cemented their popularity, distracted the populace from political unrest, and reinforced the brutal hierarchy of their empire. You, the citizen, were a grateful recipient of their generosity, reminded that your life, like the gladiators, was ultimately subject to their will. As the sun sets, casting long crimson shadows across the sand, the games finally draw to a close. You stumble out, exhausted, exhilarated, perhaps a little sickened, but undeniably changed. The images of the gladiators, their struggles, their deaths, are burned into your memory. You've witnessed the raw, untamed heart of Rome, a city addicted to blood, glory, and the terrifying dance of mortality. The modern world offers its own spectacles, its own forms of voyeurism, but few, if any, can match the primal, visceral intensity of a Roman gladiatorial show. As you close your eyes, you might still hear the distant roar of the crowd, the clang of steel, and the faint, coppery tang of the sand, forever marked by the bloodlust of the arena. Let's transport you from the blood-soaked sand of the arena to a place of steamy relaxation, of marble and mosaics, of whispered gossip and indulgent excess, the Roman baths. You might envision a simple public swimming pool, but that would be a gross underestimation. For the Romans, the baths were far more than just a place to get clean. They were a central pillar of social life, a daily ritual, and for many, an undeniable addiction to comfort, luxury, and social connection. Imagine you are walking along a busy Roman street in the late afternoon. The sun, having beaten down relentlessly all day, is beginning to soften, casting a golden hue over the city. You see streams of people, men and women, rich and poor, all heading in the same direction, towards the monumental structures that dominate the urban landscape, the vast complexes of the public baths. The sheer scale is breathtaking. These aren't just buildings, they are cities within a city, adorned with magnificent arches, towering columns, intricate sculptures, and beautiful gardens. You approach the entrance, the air immediately feeling warmer, more humid, and carrying the faint, pleasant scent of scented oils and steam. You pay a small entrance fee, often so tiny that even the poorest Roman could afford it, and step inside. The immediate impression is one of overwhelming grandeur and sensory stimulation. You are engulfed by a symphony of sounds. The splashing of water, the low murmur of conversations, the clatter of sandals on marble, the shouts of bath attendants, and the distinct rhythmic thud of a strigil scraping skin. The acoustics of these cavernous spaces are incredible, carrying every sound through the high vaulted ceilings. The light filters in through massive windows, illuminating the dazzling mosaics underfoot and the frescoes on the walls. Your first stop might be the apoditerium, the changing room. Here you strip off your tunic, perhaps leaving your clothes with an attendant, though stories of clothes being stolen were common. You feel the cool marble beneath your bare feet, the air already feeling warmer than outside. You wrap yourself in a simple linen cloth or towel, ready to begin the ritual. The baths weren't just about hygiene. They were about a structured progression of temperatures and experiences, each designed to relax and invigorate your body. You move first to the tepidarium, the warm room. The air here is comfortably heated, preparing your body for the higher temperatures to come. You might sit on a marble bench, perhaps engaging in light conversation with a friend or a stranger. This is where the social aspect truly begins. The baths were the Roman equivalent of a community center, a gym, a spa, and a lounge all rolled into one. Deals were struck, gossip exchanged, poetry recited, and political intrigues whispered. For many, it was an addiction to this vibrant social tapestry, a daily dose of human connection that was as essential as food or sleep. Next, you venture into the caldarium, the hot room. The moment you step through the doorway, a wave of intense, moist heat washes over you. Steam curls around the ornate columns, and the air is thick with condensation. Large marble pools filled with hot water beckon, and you sink into one, feeling the soothing warmth penetrate your muscles, melting away the day's tension. The sensation is exquisite, a deep, pervasive relaxation. Here you'd sweat profusely, cleansing your pores. An attendant might come by to offer you a strigil, a curved metal scraper to remove the sweat, dirt, and oil from your skin, a process that felt surprisingly invigorating. You see others being massaged with scented oils, their bodies glistening in the dim, steamy light. The sheer sensory overload, the feeling of utter physical release, was undoubtedly intoxicating, a daily escape from the rigors of Roman life. After the intense heat, you steel yourself for the plunge into the frigidarium, the cold room. This is where you would take a bracing dip in a large, unheated pool. The shock of the cold water is immediate, a sharp jolt that invigorates every nerve ending, constricting your pores and leaving you feeling refreshed and alive. The contrast is sharp, almost startling, and leaves you tingling from head to toe. This systematic progression from warm to hot to cold was not just about cleaning. It was a deeply therapeutic experience, almost a form of meditation through sensation. But the baths were much more than just rooms for washing. Surrounding these core bathing areas were a myriad of other facilities, all contributing to the addictive allure. You might find a palestra, an open-air exercise ground, where men wrestled, lifted weights, or played ball games, their grunts and shouts adding to the ambient noise. There were libraries where you could read papyrus scrolls, quiet rooms for contemplation, and often, small shops selling snacks, drinks, or scented oils. Imagine finishing your bath, feeling utterly rejuvenated, and then heading to the library to catch up on the latest philosophy, or to the taberna for a light meal and a glass of wine. The addiction here was multifaceted. It was an addiction to physical comfort, to escaping the grime and chill of the Roman streets into a world of warmth and cleanliness. It was an addiction to sensory pleasure. The feel of hot water, the scent of oils, the relief of the cold plunge. But perhaps most profoundly, it was an addiction to the social fabric of the baths. This was where you networked, made friends, caught up on news, and displayed your social standing. For the wealthy, it was a chance to show off their retinue of slaves, their elaborate anointing oils, or their patronage. For the poor, it was a place of momentary equality, where everyone, naked and vulnerable, shared a common humanity. You'd see the meticulous routines developing around these visits. Some Romans would spend hours, even an entire afternoon, at the baths. It wasn't just a quick wash, it was an event, a major part of their day's schedule, an essential ritual that could not be missed. To miss your daily bath was to miss a fundamental part of Roman society, to feel unclean both physically and socially. The comfort, the camaraderie, the sheer escapism offered by these magnificent complexes became an indispensable part of their lives. The sheer volume of water required for the baths was staggering. Miles of aqueducts, incredible feats of engineering, channeled fresh water from distant springs to feed these colossal complexes, a testament to the Romans' dedication to this daily indulgence. You realize the immense infrastructure required to support this addiction, a level of public works that still astounds engineers today. The very fabric of the city was shaped by this obsession with water and hygiene, luxury and leisure. As you step out, cleansed and invigorated, wrapped in a fresh linen cloak, you feel a profound sense of well-being. The noise of the city outside seems less harsh, the air fresher. You've not just washed your body, you've cleansed your mind, recharged your social batteries, and perhaps even conducted a little business. This daily pilgrimage to the baths was a powerful balm against the stresses of Roman life, an indulgence that became an absolute necessity, a subtle but pervasive addiction to a quality of life that few other ancient civilizations could match. As you contemplate your own modern rituals of self-care, perhaps a hot shower or a trip to a spa, you might recognize the ancient echoes of that uniquely Roman obsession with the immersive, indulgent, and undeniably addictive world of the public baths. Now, let's turn our attention to another peculiar Roman obsession, one that took the simple act of eating and elevated it to an art form of grotesque excess: the banquet. Forget your tidy dinner parties or the measured portions of a modern meal. You are about to enter a Roman dining room, known as the triclinium, where the pursuit of culinary pleasure, or rather culinary excess, became an all-consuming addiction for the wealthy elite. The air is heavy not just with the scent of exotic spices and roasted meats, but also with the aroma of perfumed oils and, quite frequently, the faint, sickening odor of vomit. You arrive at a sprawling villa, perhaps on the Palatine Hill, its entrance illuminated by numerous oil lamps. A slave guides you through a richly decorated atrium, past fountains and statuary into the dining room. Here the scene is already in full swing. Unlike your upright dining chairs, you're expected to recline on lofty, sumptuous couches arranged in a U-shape around a central table. There are 3 couches, each designed to hold 3 diners, hence triclinium. You carefully ease yourself onto one, propping yourself up on your left elbow, ready for hours of eating. The first thing you notice is the sheer volume of food. It's not just plates, it's platters, serving dishes overflowing with a bewildering array of dishes. Your senses are immediately assaulted. The visual spectacle is overwhelming: vibrant colors from exotic fruits, the glint of roasted meats, intricate garnishes, often shaped into fantastical creatures. The sounds are equally intense: the clatter of bronze cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the laughter, the occasional burp, and the soft strains of a lyre or flute being played by an unseen musician. And the smells, oh the smells! Rich, complex, a potent mixture of roasted boar, spiced fish, rare imported cheeses, and aromatic herbs. You might also detect the heavy sweetness of honeyed wine, and the underlying, almost cloying scent of roses strewn across the floor. This isn't just eating, it's a performance, a display of wealth and power. For the Roman elite, hosting banquets was an addiction to demonstrating their status, their access to the rarest ingredients, their ability to entertain on a scale that beggared belief. You'd see dishes that were less about taste and more about ostentation: peacocks roasted whole and then redressed in their feathers, dormice fattened in special clay pots and served with honey and poppy seeds, flamingo tongues, sea urchins, oysters, and garum, the ubiquitous, intensely fermented fish sauce that seasoned almost everything. You watch as the courses arrive, seemingly without end. Slaves, impeccably dressed and trained, move silently between the couches, offering dishes, pouring wine, and cleaning up any spills. There is no concept of portion control. You are expected to eat and eat and eat. The pressure is subtle but undeniable. To not eat heartily would be an insult to your host, a suggestion that his spread was not impressive enough. You feel your stomach begin to ache, but still, another slave approaches with a new delicacy, and you find yourself accepting a small piece, compelled by the social dynamics of the feast. The conversation flows as freely as the wine. Political gossip, philosophical debates, recitations of poetry, all intermingle with the sounds of eating. The Romans, you realize, were masters of multitasking indulgence. They ate, they drank, they conversed, they entertained, all with a relentless intensity. You might hear tales of famous gourmands like Apicius, a legendary Roman epicure who reportedly spent a colossal fortune on food, even inventing dishes and sailing to distant lands in pursuit of rare ingredients. His life and eventual suicide after reportedly squandering his fortune on banquets served as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration for aspiring gluttons. And then comes the peculiar and frankly disgusting Roman solution to the problem of overeating: the vomitorium. No, not a room specifically designed for vomiting as popular myth suggests, that was a passage for crowds in an amphitheater, but the common practice of intentionally inducing vomiting during a banquet to make room for more food. You see, the wealthy Romans' addiction was not just to the taste of food, but to the act of eating, to the endless pursuit of novel flavors and luxurious indulgence. To stop simply because one was full was an admission of weakness, a failure to fully participate in the glorious excess. So, you might observe a particularly dedicated diner discreetly slip away, perhaps to a private area, or even just behind a screen, to relieve themselves of their last meal, only to return a few minutes later, pale but ready to embark on another round of eating. The sight, though initially jarring to your modern sensibilities, becomes part of the bizarre normal of the Roman banquet. It highlights the almost pathological desire to continue the indulgence, to push the boundaries of what the body could endure for the sake of pleasure and social performance. The wine, too, flows freely, though it's typically diluted with water, sometimes warm, sometimes chilled with snow imported from the mountains. But even diluted, the sheer volume consumed would lead to intoxication. You watch as guests become increasingly boisterous, their voices growing louder, their movements less restrained. Slaves, trained to anticipate every need, are constantly refilling cups, offering more food, or bringing basins of perfumed water for washing hands between courses. The banquet is a long, drawn-out affair, often lasting for hours, stretching well into the night. This wasn't just a weekly occurrence. For the truly wealthy, banquets were a frequent, almost daily event, an integral part of their social calendar. The addiction was to the sensory overload, the display of power, the unbridled consumption, and the sheer, unadulterated pleasure of pushing the limits. It was a form of self-expression, a way to solidify one's place in the intricate social hierarchy of Rome. To host a more lavish banquet than your rival was a victory, a testament to your superior wealth and taste. As the night deepens, the festivities might become even more extravagant. Dancers might perform, poets recite, or philosophical discussions give way to more body entertainment. The air grows thicker, heavier with the mingled scents of food, wine, and human bodies. You might feel a dull ache in your stomach, a weariness from the sheer effort of consumption. But still, the Romans around you continue, seemingly indefatigable in their pursuit of pleasure. As you finally make your excuses and depart the villa, stepping back out into the cool Roman night, the lingering smells and sounds of the banquet cling to you. You reflect on the sheer scale of the indulgence, the almost insane pursuit of sensory gratification. Your modern understanding of a meal is fundamentally different. For the Roman elite, food was not just sustenance. It was an addiction to an endless cycle of display, consumption, and even physical discomfort, all for the sake of pleasure and prestige. The next time you sit down to a meal, you might find yourself appreciating the quiet simplicity of your plate, far removed from the gluttonous, often unsettling feasts of ancient Rome. Now, let's transition from the gluttony of the Roman banquet to its inseparable companion, wine. You might think of wine as a refined accompaniment to a meal, a sophisticated beverage. But for the ancient Romans, particularly the elite, wine was an addiction of a different magnitude, a pervasive cultural obsession that permeated almost every aspect of their lives, from religious rituals to daily sustenance and often to pure, unadulterated inebriation. Imagine yourself in a bustling Roman taberna, a tavern or wine shop, during the evening. The air is thick with the aroma of fermenting grapes, cheap olive oil burning in lamps, and the earthy smell of unwashed bodies. The sounds are boisterous: laughter, shouting, the clatter of earthenware cups, and the occasional burst of song. You stand amidst a crowd of men, and sometimes women, all with cups in hand, their faces flushed, their voices growing louder with each passing hour. For the Romans, wine was not just a drink, it was life itself. Water quality in the city was often suspect, even with the aqueducts, making wine a safer, more palatable alternative for daily consumption. But beyond practicality, it was deeply ingrained in their culture and religion. Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry, was revered, and his festivals, the Bacchanalia, were notorious for their ecstatic, often wild, celebrations. This gave a sacred veneer to their drinking, blurring the lines between piety and outright intoxication. You watch as a server, usually a slave, ladles wine from a large amphora into individual cups. The wine is almost universally diluted with water. To drink pure wine, *merum*, was considered barbarous, a sign of a lack of self-control, fit only for uncultured barbarians or common drunkards. Yet, the amount of diluted wine consumed could still lead to profound intoxication. You see evidence of this all around you: slurred speech, clumsy movements, sudden bursts of anger or affection. The addiction to wine was multifaceted. It was an addiction to the taste, which varied wildly depending on the grape, the region, and the additives. Roman wines were often thick, sweet, and heavily spiced with honey, herbs, or even seawater to preserve them or alter their flavor. They had names like Falernian, Cacuban, and Mossic, each with its own reputation and vintage. You might be offered a taste and find it surprisingly different from modern wines, perhaps sweeter, more syrupy, or with an unexpected hint of resin or spice. But more than taste, it was an addiction to the effect. The loosening of inhibitions, the warmth spreading through your body, the temporary escape from the anxieties of daily life. For many Romans, especially those lower down the social ladder, life was hard. Constant labor, meager wages, and the ever-present threat of disease or debt. Wine offered a brief respite, a momentary forgetting of worries, a cheap and readily available form of solace. You see the tired eyes of a laborer light up after a few cups, his shoulders relaxing, a smile finally gracing his lips. For the elite, the wine addiction took on a different, more refined but no less potent form. At their banquets, the symposium drinking party was a structured event, often following the main meal. Here, the choice of wine was a statement of status, the topic of long discussions. The host would boast of his rare vintages, his imported amphorae, his knowledge of the best producers. You'd witness men engaging in drinking games, challenging each other to drain cups in a single gulp, or to recite poetry perfectly after numerous servings. The pursuit of sophisticated intoxication, the ability to hold one's liquor while still appearing witty and urbane, was a cherished skill, a performance in itself. You might be invited to such a gathering. The atmosphere is more controlled than in the taberna, but the underlying current of indulgence is just as strong. The wine is served by trained slaves, often in beautifully crafted silver goblets. The discussion might begin with philosophy or literature, but as the evening wears on and the wine flows more freely, the conversation inevitably veers towards bawdier jokes, political intrigues, or personal revelations. You realize that wine acts as a social lubricant, a truth serum, stripping away the carefully constructed facades of Roman society. The Roman obsession with wine led to incredible ingenuity in its production and storage. They understood terroir, experimented with different grape varieties, and developed sophisticated methods for aging wine in amphorae sealed with pitch. They even had a rudimentary form of quality control, with seals indicating the vintage and origin. You might walk through a market and see dozens of different wines on offer, each promising a unique experience, each contributing to the pervasive culture of drinking. But the addiction had its dark side too. You'd hear tales of chronic drunkenness, of men ruining their health, their careers, and their families through excessive drinking. Roman literature is full of condemnations of inebriation, yet simultaneously, it celebrates the joys of wine. It's a paradox, isn't it? The very society that extols temperance is often the most prone to excess. You'd see the haggard faces of those who had drunk too much the night before, their hands trembling, their eyes bloodshot. The hangovers were undoubtedly brutal, only to be followed by another round of drinking as the cycle continued. There were also specific drinks that bordered on hallucinogenic or mind-altering. Some wines were infused with herbs or even mild narcotics to enhance their effects, adding another layer to the Romans' pursuit of altered states of consciousness. You might encounter an individual who seems unusually disconnected, his eyes glazed, his movements lethargic, clearly under the influence of something more potent than just fermented grapes. The Roman army, too, relied heavily on wine. Soldiers were given daily rations, not just for its morale-boosting properties, but also because it was a safer alternative to water in unfamiliar territories. Imagine a legionary thousands of miles from home, his only comfort a cup of rough wine at the end of a long, brutal day of marching and fighting. It was a functional addiction, perhaps, but an addiction nonetheless, a deeply ingrained part of their daily routine that became impossible to do without. As you step out of the taberna into the cool Roman night, the sounds of revelry still echoing behind you, you feel the lingering warmth of the wine you've consumed. You realize that Bacchus's grip was far more pervasive than just a fondness for a drink. It was a cultural imperative, a social ritual, a deeply personal escape, and for countless Romans an undeniable, often destructive addiction. Your own relationship with alcohol might seem tame in comparison. For them, wine was the thread that wove through the tapestry of their lives, providing comfort, celebration, and sometimes ruin, all under the intoxicating spell of the grape. Let's turn now to an aspect of Roman life that, while often celebrated in art, was simultaneously a source of profound societal complexity and for many an undeniable addiction: sex. Forget the coy romantic comedies of your era. You are about to witness a society where sexual expression, desire, and access were woven into the very fabric of daily existence, often in ways that would shock and intrigue your modern sensibilities. The air isn't just filled with the usual Roman odors. There's a certain musk, a palpable current of sensuality that underlies much of the city's interactions. Imagine walking through the infamous red light district of Pompeii, a city frozen in time by Vesuvius. Even here, in a smaller Roman town, the prevalence of sexual services is striking. The streets are narrow, dimly lit by oil lamps, and the air carries whispers, laughter, and the faint scent of perfumes mingling with the more earthy smells of human bodies. You see small, unassuming doorways marked with erotic frescoes or symbols, signifying a lupanar, a brothel. These aren't hidden away, they are an open, accepted, and highly visible part of the urban landscape. You might peek into one and your eyes adjust to the dim light. Small, cramped cells, sometimes with stone beds, are adorned with frescoes depicting various sexual acts. The women and sometimes men who work here are often slaves, or freed women in desperate circumstances, their lives a stark contrast to the opulence of the patrician villas. Their faces, though sometimes painted, bear the marks of a hard life. The sounds are hushed, intimate, punctuated by the occasional moan or the rustle of clothing. For many Roman men, particularly those of means, access to sex was a daily expectation, an almost compulsive need. Their addiction wasn't just to the physical act, but to the assertion of dominance, the gratification of immediate desire, and the social status that came with it. Roman society, though generally conservative in its public face, had a remarkably pragmatic and open approach to sex outside of marriage, particularly for men. Wives were for procreation and managing the household. Concubines, prostitutes, and slaves were for pleasure. This dual standard, while harsh and unfair to women, created a culture where sexual indulgence was widely available and largely condoned for men. You'd notice the widespread presence of prostitutes throughout the city. They weren't just confined to brothels. You'd find them near the public baths, in taverns, by the forum, even soliciting on the streets. Their dress, often a distinctive toga or a brightly colored stola, made them identifiable. The prices varied wildly, from a few small coins for a quick encounter with a streetwalker to vast sums for the services of a high-class meretrix or hetaira, who might also be educated and witty companions. The addiction here for many was to the sheer variety and constant availability. There was always someone, somewhere, willing to fulfill a desire. It speaks to a deeply ingrained cultural expectation, a society that not only tolerated but facilitated this pervasive sexual economy. You, from your modern perspective, might find it jarring, the blatant commodification of bodies, the lack of agency for many involved. But for the Roman man, it was simply part of the landscape, another pleasure to be indulged. Beyond casual encounters, Roman society was rife with more structured forms of sexual indulgence, especially among the elite. Think of the lavish banquets we discussed earlier, often morphing into decadent orgies as the night wore on and inhibitions dissolved with the wine. You can almost smell the perfumes, the sweat, the lingering scent of food and drink, as the boundaries of propriety became increasingly blurred. The sounds would shift from polite conversation to unrestrained laughter, suggestive whispers, and eventually, the more intimate sounds of passion. Here, the addiction wasn't just physical, it was deeply psychological. It was the thrill of transgression, the display of power, the breaking of taboos within a sanctioned environment. For the host, it was another way to demonstrate wealth and influence, to offer his guests the ultimate in sensory gratification. For the guests, it was an escape from the rigid moral codes of public life, a plunge into a world of uninhibited pleasure. The sheer sensory overload, the physical intimacy, the loss of self and collective debauchery, could be profoundly addictive. You might also observe the more complex dynamics of sexual relationships with slaves. Roman law granted masters extensive power over their slaves, including their bodies. This created a culture where sexual exploitation was institutionalized. While such acts were often viewed differently than consensual sexual relationships, the power dynamic was undeniable. For some masters, this absolute control, this unfettered access, could become a deeply entrenched, almost pathological addiction to domination and gratification. Homosexuality, too, was viewed differently than in many modern societies. While relationships between adult male citizens were often frowned upon, a Roman man taking a younger, subordinate male, slave or freedman, as a lover was generally accepted, so long as the citizen maintained the active role, preserving his masculine status. This further expanded the scope of available sexual outlets, contributing to a society where the pursuit of carnal pleasure was remarkably broad and diverse. Emperors, as always, were at the forefront of this indulgence. Figures like Caligula, Nero, and Heliogabalus are legendary for their sexual excesses, their willingness to push every boundary from incest to public orgies, all fueled by absolute power and an insatiable appetite for gratification. Their stories, even if exaggerated by hostile historians, illustrate the extreme depths to which this addiction could lead when unchecked by any external authority. For these emperors, their power allowed them to indulge every whim, and their sexual appetites grew monstrous as a result. The Roman fascination with sex was also evident in their art and literature. Erotic frescoes adorned the walls of homes and brothels. Poets like Catullus and Ovid wrote explicit verses celebrating love, lust, and illicit affairs. This open acknowledgement of sexuality, in contrast to later periods of history, suggests a society that, for all its public moralizing, understood and perhaps even celebrated the powerful, addictive force of human desire. As you consider this aspect of Roman life, you realize the profound difference in cultural norms. Your modern world, for all its supposed openness, still grapples with prudishness, shame, and complex regulations around sex. The Romans, in their own way, had a different set of rules, ones that facilitated an astonishingly pervasive and accessible sexual culture. For many, this was an undeniable addiction, an addiction to pleasure, to power, to variety, to the constant gratification of primal urges. Stepping away from the clamor and whispers of ancient Rome's carnal underbelly, you might feel a mix of fascination and unease. The Roman Empire, in its pursuit of conquest and glory, was also in many ways an empire built on the bedrock of human desire, a society where sex in all its forms was a driving, irresistible, and often addictive force. You might find yourself questioning the true nature of morality and indulgence as you reflect on this compelling and complex facet of their ancient world. Let's delve now into a more insidious, yet equally pervasive Roman addiction, one that promised oblivion from pain and a fleeting glimpse of euphoria: the poppy. While not as overtly celebrated as wine or banquets, the use of opium and other mind-altering substances was deeply embedded in Roman society, providing relief, escape, and ultimately a powerful, quiet addiction. Forget your sterile pharmacies and regulated prescriptions. You're entering a world where medicine and pleasure often blurred into a potent, unregulated cocktail. Imagine yourself in a bustling Roman marketplace, perhaps in the city of Ephesus, a major trading hub in the east. Among the exotic spices, fragrant perfumes, and bustling merchants, you'd notice stalls dedicated to herbs and medicinal preparations. The air here has a different quality, a faint, sweet, slightly acrid scent that hints at something powerful. You might see dried poppy heads or small dark lumps of what looks like resin, raw opium, imported from the Near East. Opium, derived from the opium poppy, *papaver somniferum*, was known to the Romans as opium thebaicum, named after Thebes in Egypt, a major center of its cultivation. It wasn't just a recreational drug, it was a cornerstone of Roman medicine. Physicians like Dioscorides and Galen extensively documented its properties, recognizing its potent analgesic, pain-relieving, and sedative effects. You'd see it prescribed for a bewildering array of ailments: chronic pain, insomnia, coughs, diarrhea, even as an anesthetic during surgery. So the addiction here often began innocently as a desperate search for relief. Imagine a Roman soldier suffering from a grievous wound, perhaps a festering spear gash from a frontier skirmish. The pain would be unimaginable, relentless, often leading to delirium. A physician would offer a draught containing opium, and for the first time in days, the soldier would find blissful oblivion, a deep, restorative sleep. For someone in such agony, the relief would be nothing short of miraculous, a lifeline in a world without modern painkillers. This powerful, instant cessation of suffering could easily lead to dependence, an urgent craving for that release whenever pain or even discomfort resurfaced. You'd also witness its use in calming the anxieties of daily life. Roman life, even for the wealthy, was filled with stressors: political intrigue, social pressures, the constant threat of disease, and the pervasive fear of death. For those seeking an escape from the relentless grind, opium offered a tranquilizing embrace, a soothing balm for troubled minds. You might observe a wealthy matron, prone to bouts of melancholia, taking a small dose to calm her nerves, or a senator using it to ensure a night of undisturbed sleep after a day of intense political maneuvering. The forms of consumption varied. It could be taken as a raw gum, dissolved in wine, or incorporated into more complex preparations like theriac or mithridatium, elaborate antidotes and panaceas containing dozens of ingredients, often with opium as the most potent component. You might encounter a Roman carrying a small vial, a personal supply of his chosen opiate, a quiet companion to his daily struggles. The availability was widespread, not just through physicians but also through street vendors and herbalists. The effects were well known: a profound sense of calm, pain relief, drowsiness, and in larger doses, a euphoric detachment from reality. You can imagine the allure: to be free from nagging aches, from the relentless chatter of your own mind, to float in a hazy, dreamlike state. For people living in a brutal and often uncomfortable world, this escape was incredibly potent, a potent addiction born of suffering and the promise of peace. However, the Romans also recognized the dangers. Chronic users often exhibited symptoms of addiction: lethargy, constipation, withdrawal symptoms when the drug was withheld, and a progressively higher tolerance requiring larger doses. While not as explicitly documented as a social problem like gambling or excessive drinking, the personal tragedies of opium addiction were undoubtedly present. You might see individuals who seemed perpetually drowsy, their eyes unfocused, their movements slow and deliberate, clearly under the drug's heavy influence, their lives gradually consumed by its embrace. Emperors too were not immune. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, was known to use opium extensively in the form of theriac to manage chronic pain. His personal physician Galen carefully controlled his dosage, but the emperor's dependence was apparent. Here the addiction was rooted in genuine physical suffering, a testament to the drug's undeniable efficacy, but also to its powerful hold even on the most disciplined minds. Imagine the burden of ruling an empire while battling constant pain, finding your only relief in a daily dose of a powerful narcotic. The widespread use of opium also had broader social implications. It contributed to a society that, at times, seemed to seek solace and escape from its own realities. While the Stoic ideal of enduring hardship was revered, the practical reality for many was a search for comfort and oblivion. Opium, readily available and culturally accepted as medicine, provided that escape. You might also consider other mind-altering substances, though their use was less widespread and documented than opium. Cannabis was known, though primarily for its fiber, hemp, and seeds. Belladonna, mandrake, and henbane were used in medicinal preparations, sometimes for their sedative or hallucinogenic properties, though their toxicity made them dangerous. The Romans, in their quest for remedies and pleasure, experimented with the natural world around them, often stumbling upon powerful and addictive compounds. As you reflect on the Roman relationship with opium, you find a stark contrast to modern attitudes. For them, it was a vital tool in their medical arsenal, a gift from the gods to alleviate suffering. Yet, this very acceptance and availability also made it a silent, potent enslaver, drawing countless individuals into its inescapable embrace. You are reminded that the human quest for relief, for escape from pain and anxiety, is an ancient and enduring one, and that the substances we turn to, even with the best intentions, can sometimes forge the strongest chains of addiction. As you close your eyes, you might ponder the quiet desperation of a Roman seeking solace, finding it in the milky sap of a poppy, a temporary heaven that often led to an earthly hell. Let's shift our senses now, from the pungent smells of the Roman streets to the heady, intoxicating aromas of their beauty rituals. Forget your minimalist skincare routines and subtle perfumes. You are about to enter a world where scent and appearance were an undeniable addiction, a relentless pursuit of beauty, status, and alluring fragrance that permeated every aspect of Roman elite life. The air here isn't just perfumed, it's dense with a complex tapestry of floral, musky, and spicy notes, an olfactory signature of power and indulgence. Imagine you are in a wealthy Roman villa, observing the morning routine of a noblewoman. This isn't a quick wash and dress. It's an elaborate hours-long ritual involving a retinue of slaves. The room is filled with jars, vials, alabaster boxes, and intricate bronze mirrors. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer volume of products, far beyond what you might expect. The sounds are soft, whispered commands to slaves, the gentle clinking of implements, and the rustle of fine linen. The addiction here is multifaceted. An addiction to appearance, to the illusion of eternal youth, to the exquisite pleasure of scent, and crucially to the display of status. For Roman women, and indeed many men, looking good was not a vanity. It was a social imperative, a reflection of their family's wealth and their own place in the rigid hierarchy. You watch as a slave carefully prepares the mistress's skin. First, a cleansing with natural oils, perhaps olive oil mixed with perfumed herbs, followed by a gentle exfoliation. Then come the masks, based on barley flour, honey, eggs, or even more unusual ingredients like crocodile dung or lead carbonate, intended to lighten the skin or remove blemishes. You might observe the woman reclining, her face covered, while another slave meticulously plucks stray hairs with tiny bronze tweezers. The dedication is total, the pursuit of flawlessness an almost obsessive endeavor. Then comes the application of makeup. Forget the subtle enhancements of today. Roman cosmetics were bold and often highly pigmented. White lead was commonly used to lighten the complexion, creating a ghostly pallor that was highly fashionable but also incredibly toxic. You'd see rouged cheeks, often painted with red ochre or madder root. The eyes were heavily made up. Kohl, a black powder made from antimony, was applied to the lashes and eyelids, creating a dramatic almond shape. Eyebrows were darkened and often extended, sometimes even drawn on entirely if sparse. The overall effect, while perhaps jarring to your modern eye, was considered the epitome of beauty. The lips, too, were painted, often with red ochre or dyes from plants. You realize the effort involved, the precision required by the slaves who acted as cosmeti beauty assistants. The wealthy Roman woman's addiction was not just to the end result, but to the entire process, the daily transformation, the ritualistic creation of an idealized self. It was a laborious, time-consuming, and expensive addiction. But the most pervasive and luxurious addiction was to perfumes or unguenta. Rome was drenched in scent. Perfumes were applied liberally to the body, hair, clothing, and even to pets. Homes were scented with fragrant oils burned in lamps, and at banquets, perfume might even be sprayed into the air or dripped onto doves to fly over guests, showering them with scent. You inhale the rich, complex aromas: myrrh, frankincense, spikenard, rose, jasmine, saffron, cinnamon, ambergris, many imported from distant lands, a testament to Rome's vast trade networks. You'd notice different scents for different occasions, different parts of the body. An oil for the hair, another for the skin, a richer perfume for public appearances. For men, scent was equally important, though often less overt. A well-groomed senator would use perfumed oils after his bath, a subtle indication of his wealth and refinement. Some men, however, took it to excess, leading to satirists ridiculing their effeminacy. The sheer desire to smell good, to mask the omnipresent unpleasant odors of a large ancient city, and to project an aura of luxury, became an all-consuming drive. The addiction to perfume was deeply sensory. It was the exquisite pleasure of the aroma itself, the way it clung to the skin and hair, the immediate boost to one's mood. But it was also an addiction to the power of scent. A particular perfume could evoke memory, provoke desire, or signify status. To wear a rare, expensive perfume was to announce your wealth, your sophistication, and your access to the furthest reaches of the empire. You realize that a Roman's scent was as much a part of their identity as their toga or their family name. The materials for these beauty products and perfumes were incredibly expensive. Ingredients like genuine ambergris or rare spices from India represented vast sums of money. The production of these fragrances was also a highly skilled art, often carried out by Greek or Egyptian perfumers in Rome. This economic aspect further fueled the addiction. The more expensive, the more desirable, the more powerful the statement of wealth. You'd hear tales of noble women spending fortunes on a single vial of precious perfume, their addiction to luxury often driving them into debt. Beyond the physical application, Roman society's addiction to appearance extended to hair styling. Wigs were common, especially among women seeking to achieve the elaborate, towering coiffures fashionable in imperial times. Slave hairdressers, known as ornatrices, spent hours sculpting intricate braids, curls, and updos, often using hot irons to achieve the desired effect. The demand for specific hairstyles, often dictated by the empress, became a relentless fashion cycle, another aspect of the all-consuming pursuit of an idealized self. As the noblewoman finally emerges from her elaborate beauty ritual, she is transformed. Her skin is pale, her cheeks flushed, her eyes dramatically lined, and she is enveloped in a cloud of exotic perfume. She is ready to face the world, not just beautiful but powerful, confident, and utterly perfumed. You understand that this wasn't mere vanity, it was a deeply ingrained cultural practice, an addiction to projecting an image of perfection, of wealth, and of refined sensuality. As you consider your own daily routines, the quiet efficiency of your modern cosmetics, you might marvel at the sheer dedication, expense, and perhaps toxicity that the Romans were willing to endure in their relentless pursuit of beauty and fragrance. Their addiction to appearance, to the intoxicating power of scent, was a powerful force that shaped their daily lives, their economy, and their very self-perception. You might still catch a faint, lingering aroma of rose and myrrh, a ghost of an ancient obsession that continues to fascinate. Let us now move from the sensory world of perfumes and banquets to a more dangerous, insatiable Roman addiction, the craving for political power and the endless, often lethal game of intrigue that accompanied it. Forget your structured elections and peaceful transfers of authority. You are about to witness a political landscape where ambition was a consuming fire, paranoia a daily companion, and the pursuit of ultimate control an addiction that drove men to unimaginable heights and unspeakable acts. The air in Rome's political circles isn't just thick with rhetoric, it's charged with unspoken threats, simmering rivalries, and the constant hum of whispers. Imagine yourself in the Roman Forum, not during a bustling market day, but during a tense political assembly or a heated court case. The marble gleams under the sun, but the atmosphere is anything but serene. Orators, often senators, stand on the rostra, their voices booming, their gestures dramatic, captivating the crowd. You notice the intensity in their eyes, the calculated passion in their speeches. For these men, politics wasn't a profession. It was a lifeblood, an all-consuming passion that bordered on pathological. You might observe a young man, a rising star, meticulously cultivating his network of clients, delivering eloquent speeches, showering the populace with largesse to win their favor. His every move is calculated, every word chosen for maximum impact. He is driven by an insatiable hunger, a deep-seated belief that he is destined for greatness. This is a subtle addiction, perhaps, but one that consumed entire lives, often leading to personal ruin or violent death. Consider the paranoia that accompanied this addiction. In a world where political rivals could literally be murdered in the street, where accusations of treason could lead to exile or execution, trust was a rare commodity. You'd see men constantly looking over their shoulders, their alliances shifting like sand. The addiction to power created a climate of fear, where everyone was a potential threat, and every favor was a calculated risk. The whisper network, the constant flow of rumors, the veiled threats, these were the daily bread of Roman political life. The historical accounts are filled with examples. Marius and Sulla, Caesar and Pompey, Augustus and Antony, their lives were defined by a ruthless struggle for supremacy, an addictive game of political chess where the stakes were always life and death. You'd read how men like Cicero, a brilliant orator, were consumed by the desire for influence, their lives ultimately cut short by political enemies. The sheer mental effort, the constant strategizing, the sleepless nights spent planning coups or defending against accusations. This was the reality of a life addicted to power. Emperors, of course, took this addiction to its most extreme. For them, the power was absolute, unchecked by any meaningful constitutional restraint. And with absolute power often came absolute corruption, and an insatiable desire to maintain and expand that control. You'd hear tales of Caligula declaring himself a god, of Nero murdering his own mother to consolidate his authority, of Domitian's reign of terror fueled by paranoia and a lust for control. Their addiction to power warped their personalities, turning them into tyrants, their every action dictated by the need to eliminate rivals and maintain their precarious grip on the throne. You might consider the chilling practice of damnatio memoriae, where a condemned emperor's name would be chiseled from inscriptions, his statues defaced, his very memory erased from public record. This wasn't just punishment, it was a desperate attempt by the succeeding powers to control the narrative, to erase a threat, to assert their own dominance. It speaks to the profound insecurity, the constant anxiety, that plagued even the most powerful Romans. The means to acquire and maintain power were often brutal. Poisonings were common, discreet, and effective. Assassinations were a frequent political tool, from the murder of the Gracchi brothers to the infamous assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March. You'd realize that the serene marble busts in museums hide a history of betrayal, backstabbing, and violence. The addiction to power fueled a relentless cycle of paranoia and preemptive strikes. The Romans also had an addiction to public spectacle as a means of control. The gladiatorial games, the chariot races, the distribution of free grain, these were not just entertainment or charity. They were carefully orchestrated displays of imperial generosity, designed to keep the populace docile and dependent, to reinforce the emperor's power, and to distract them from any political grievances. You, the citizen, were a willing recipient of these benefits, a cog in the vast machinery of imperial power, subtly conditioned to accept the status quo. Even the architecture reflects this addiction. The massive scale of public buildings, the towering aqueducts, the colossal Colosseum, these were not just functional structures. They were monumental statements of imperial power, tangible symbols of Rome's dominance, designed to inspire awe and reinforce the authority of the men who commissioned them. You walk among these ruins today and feel a faint echo of that ancient, irresistible urge to build, to create, to leave an indelible mark on history, all driven by the addiction to legacy and power. As you reflect on the poisoned chalice of Roman political life, you recognize a timeless truth. The pursuit of power, left unchecked, can become the most destructive of all addictions. It twists ambition into ruthlessness, fosters paranoia, and ultimately consumes those who succumb to its intoxicating allure. Your modern political landscape, with all its complexities, seems tame in comparison to the brutal high-stakes game played in ancient Rome, where the price of losing was often not just your career but your very life. You might feel a chill as you consider the shadows that once stretched from the rostra, concealing plots and betrayals, born of an insatiable thirst for control. Let's now turn our gaze from the dangerous game of power to a more outwardly glittering, yet equally consuming Roman addiction. Luxuria, the insatiable craving for material possessions, for opulence, and for the lavish display of wealth. Forget your carefully curated minimalist aesthetics. You are about to step into a world where more was always more, where possessions weren't just objects but extensions of one's identity, and where the pursuit of luxury became an all-consuming, often ruinous, obsession. The air isn't just scented with exotic perfumes. It's charged with the unspoken competition of who owns the most, the finest, the rarest. Imagine you are visiting a wealthy Roman villa, perhaps on the Bay of Naples, overlooking the sparkling Mediterranean. This isn't just a house, it's a monument to excess. The floors are intricate mosaics depicting mythological scenes, the walls are adorned with vibrant frescoes, and every surface seems to shimmer with gold, silver, and imported marble. You walk through vast gardens filled with exotic plants and elaborate fountains, past statues imported from Greece. The sheer scale and opulence are breathtaking, almost overwhelming to your modern senses. The addiction here is to the object itself, to its rarity, its craftsmanship, and most importantly, to its ability to signify status. For the Roman elite, possessions were not just for personal enjoyment. They were a public declaration of one's wealth, taste, and social standing. The concept of ostentatio, conspicuous display, was paramount. You didn't just own beautiful things, you made sure everyone knew you owned them. You'd observe collections that would rival modern museums. Intricately carved gems, cameos, and signet rings adorning every finger. Elaborate silver tableware, each piece a work of art, would grace banqueting tables, only to be cleaned by slaves and carefully stored away. Furniture was often inlaid with ivory, tortoise shell, or precious metals. Lamps were crafted from bronze in fantastical shapes, casting flickering light over priceless art. The sheer volume of beautifully crafted objects, all gathered to impress, was staggering. Consider the obsession with exotic animals. Peacocks roamed freely in wealthy gardens, not just for their beauty but as a symbol of their owner's ability to acquire and maintain such rare creatures. Some wealthy Romans even kept exotic birds like parrots or cranes, or even more dangerous animals in private menageries, a testament to their extravagance and a literal display of their global reach. This wasn't just a pet, it was a living, breathing status symbol, an indulgence that spoke volumes without a single word. The clothing too was a massive component of this addiction. While the basic Roman tunic and toga were simple, the quality of the fabric, the richness of the dyes, and the intricate embroidery transformed them into statements of wealth. You'd see purple-dyed cloaks, a color so expensive due to the rare murex snail dye that it was reserved for emperors and senators. Fine imported silks from China, spun into delicate garments, were draped with a studied nonchalance. For Roman women, jewelry was a passion. Elaborate necklaces, earrings, and bracelets crafted from gold and set with precious gems like emeralds, pearls, and sapphires, often acquired at enormous cost. You'd witness the relentless competition among the elite. A senator would invite guests to his villa, not just for the conversation but to subtly, or not so subtly, display his latest acquisition. A rare Greek sculpture, a new set of silverware, or an exquisitely carved gem. The guests, in turn, would mentally catalog these items, gauging their host's current financial standing and planning their own retaliatory displays of luxuria. This wasn't merely friendly competition. It was an addictive, escalating arms race of material possessions. The consequences of this addiction were often severe. Many wealthy Romans plunged themselves into staggering debt trying to keep up with the latest trends or to outdo their rivals. Roman moralists and satirists frequently railed against luxuria, condemning it as a corrosive force that undermined traditional Roman virtues of frugality and moderation. They bemoaned the loss of simple living, seeing the obsession with material goods as a sign of moral decay. Yet, despite the condemnations, the addiction persisted, its siren call too strong to resist for those who could afford it. The emperors themselves were often the most egregious examples of this addiction. Nero with his golden house, Domus Aurea, a sprawling palace adorned with gold, precious stones, and an enormous revolving dining room, epitomized the imperial obsession with luxury. Caligula would reportedly dissolve priceless pearls in vinegar and drink them, a grotesque display of wealth simply to show he could. For these rulers, luxuria wasn't just a personal indulgence. It was a projection of imperial power, a deliberate statement that Rome and its emperor could command any resource from anywhere in the world. Even small, everyday objects became targets for this addiction. Fine glassware, intricately carved bone combs, elegantly decorated oil lamps, and exotic incense burners. Every item in a wealthy Roman household was often a testament to lavish spending. You realize that for many Romans, the line between necessity and excessive ornamentation was not just blurred, but completely erased. As you step away from the glittering, overwhelming display of Roman luxuria, you might find yourself reflecting on your own relationship with material possessions. While your modern world has its own forms of consumerism and status symbols, the sheer, unbridled, and often ethically questionable pursuit of luxury in ancient Rome stands as a stark testament to the addictive power of things. For them, every object was a statement, every acquisition a victory, every display a confirmation of their place in a world obsessed with appearances. You might feel a profound sense of both fascination and unease, recognizing the timeless human urge to surround oneself with beauty and to project power through possessions. A craving that, for the Romans, became an all-consuming way of life. Let's thunder now from the silent opulence of Roman villas to the deafening roar of the Circus Maximus, the ultimate arena for another Roman addiction, chariot racing. Forget your quiet sporting broadcasts. You are about to be plunged into a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled spectacle that gripped the Roman populace with an intensity that makes modern sports fandom pale in comparison. The air here isn't just dusty, it's thick with the smell of horse sweat, manure, human bodies, and the palpable tension of tens of thousands of screaming fans. Imagine you are standing, or rather, squeezed into a crowd of over 150,000 spectators at the Circus Maximus. This is not just a building, it's a colossal, elongated arena, over 600 meters long, dwarfing even the Colosseum. Its towering tiers rise into the sky, packed with men and women, rich and poor, all united by a single, all-consuming passion. The sheer scale of humanity is overwhelming, a single roaring beast of collective excitement. The addiction here is raw, visceral, and collective. It's an addiction to speed, to danger, to the thrill of high-stakes competition, and to the intoxicating power of mass hysteria. Chariot racing wasn't just a sport, it was a religion, a political statement, and a profound emotional outlet for millions of Romans. You look down onto the sandy track, an oval course with a central barrier called the spina, adorned with elaborate statues, obelisks, and lap counters, often dolphins or eggs that would be turned over. The chariots themselves are flimsy, lightweight constructs, often made of wood and leather, designed for maximum speed. Each is drawn by 2, 4, or even 6 horses, powerful, muscular animals, their flanks glistening with sweat, their eyes wide with anticipation. Then come the charioteers, the rock stars of the Roman world. They are often slaves or freedmen, but incredibly wealthy and famous. They wear distinctive colors, red, white, green, and blue, representing the 4 major factions or teams. You immediately understand the intensity of the rivalry. This isn't just a team, it's an identity, a family, an obsession. People would live and die for their chosen color. You instinctively find yourself drawn to one, feeling a surge of loyalty, a desire for your color to triumph. The charioteers are lightly armored, wearing leather helmets and breastplates, with reins often tied around their waists, giving them maximum control but also making falls incredibly dangerous. They carry a curved knife, a falx, to cut themselves free if they crash, a grim testament to the sport's brutality. You can feel the danger emanating from the track, the constant, palpable threat of injury and death. A hush falls over the crowd, a momentary intake of breath. Then the starting signal, a white cloth dropped by the emperor or magistrate, and the gates, the carceres, burst open. The thunder is immediate and overwhelming. The ground beneath you trembles as the horses surge forward, their hooves pounding the sand, the chariots rattling and swaying precariously. The roar of the crowd is deafening, a wave of sound that physically hits you, almost knocking the air from your lungs. You watch, completely mesmerized, as the chariots race around the spina, 7 laps, each turn a potential disaster. The charioteers lean into the turns, their bodies almost parallel to the ground, skillfully avoiding collisions, jostling for position. The speed is astonishing, the horses a blur of muscle and fury. You can almost feel the wind whip past their faces, the spray of sand from their hooves. The sensory experience is total. The smell of the horses, the sound of the hooves, the visual spectacle of speed and color. Collisions are frequent and brutal. A chariot might clip the spina, sending it careening into another, or a wheel might buckle, throwing the charioteer to the ground. The sight of a charioteer being dragged by his horses, his body bouncing lifelessly on the sand, or of horses entangled in a bloody, screaming mess, is horrific yet somehow morbidly fascinating. The crowd gasps, then roars, some with horror, some with a perverse thrill. This is the raw, unfiltered violence that fuels the addiction. The very real possibility of death, the brutal dance between triumph and tragedy. The betting is insane. This is where fortunes are made and lost in moments. You can bet on individual charioteers, on factions, on the order of finish. The emotional investment of the crowd is directly tied to their wagers. You'd see men screaming themselves hoarse, their faces contorted with desperation or ecstasy, their hopes and fears riding on every turn of the wheel. The gambling aspect adds another layer of addictive intensity to the spectacle. The factional rivalries were not just about the races. They were deeply ingrained social and political divisions. The Greens and Blues in particular became powerful political entities, almost like modern political parties with their own fan clubs, their own rituals, and sometimes their own violent street gangs. You'd hear tales of riots breaking out between rival factions, of assassinations, of emperors like Caligula or Nero so obsessed with a particular faction that they would openly favor them, shower them with gifts, and even participate in their festivities. This addiction to chariot racing transcended social barriers. Emperors, senators, merchants, slaves, everyone was swept up in the mania. For the common people, it was a release valve, a chance to escape the drudgery of daily life and immerse themselves in a world of high-octane drama. For the elite, it was a display of their power and generosity, funding the games and enjoying the adoration of the masses. You'd see the passionate devotion of fans. Graffiti would be scrawled on walls, celebrating victorious charioteers, their names chanted in the streets. Talismans and good luck charms depicting favorite horses or charioteers would be widely sold. The stories of legendary charioteers like Diocles, who reportedly won thousands of races and amassed a fortune equivalent to billions of dollars today, were widely known and celebrated, inspiring generations of fans. As the final lap concludes, and the winning charioteer crosses the finish line, a deafening roar erupts. The victorious charioteer raises his whip in triumph, a hero for a day, his face grimed with dust and sweat, his body bruised but exultant. You feel a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, your throat raw from shouting, your heart still pounding from the adrenaline. You've been utterly consumed by the spectacle, a willing participant in the thunderous addiction of Roman chariot mania. Stepping out into the Roman night, the fading cheers still echoing in your ears, you realize the profound impact these races had. They weren't just entertainment, they were a central artery of Roman life, pumping excitement, passion, and brutal beauty into the heart of the empire. Your modern sporting events, for all their fervor, rarely evoke such raw life-or-death intensity. You might still feel the phantom vibration of the ground, the distant roar of the crowd, a lingering ghost of Rome's most thunderous and addictive spectacle. Let's now move from the visceral, physical spectacles of the arena to a more intellectual, yet equally addictive Roman pursuit: rhetoric. Forget your polite disagreements and measured arguments. You are about to witness a society where the power of words, the art of persuasion, and the thrill of intellectual combat became an all-consuming passion, an addiction to verbal dominance that shaped law, politics, and social status. The air in Rome's lecture halls and courtrooms isn't just filled with words. It's charged with intellect, cunning, and the raw, compelling energy of skilled argumentation. Imagine you are seated in a Roman basilica, a grand public hall serving as a courthouse, listening to a legal dispute. This isn't a dry recitation of facts, it's a dramatic performance. The advocate, a skilled orator, stands before the judge and a jury, his voice booming, his gestures expansive, his toga draped with an artistic flair. His face is animated, his eyes flashing with conviction, real or feigned. The sounds are a mix of his eloquent speech, the murmurs of the crowd, and the occasional sharp interjection from an opponent. The addiction here is to the power of language, to the ability to sway minds, to bend reality through carefully crafted arguments, and to emerge victorious in a battle of wits. For ambitious Roman men, particularly those destined for politics or law, rhetoric was not merely a skill, it was a weapon, a currency, and a profound personal obsession. The ability to speak well, to persuade, to charm, to intimidate with words, was paramount to success in Roman society. You'd observe the orator's technique. He doesn't just present facts, he crafts a narrative, weaving in emotional appeals, historical allusions, and philosophical principles. He uses dramatic pauses, changes in tone and volume, and even carefully rehearsed body language to maximize his impact. He is an actor, a poet, and a strategist all in one. You might find yourself leaning forward, utterly captivated by the flow of his words, even if you don't fully understand the legal intricacies. The sheer artistry of his speech is intoxicating. Consider the training involved. Young Roman men of good families began their rhetorical education early, often with private tutors and then in schools of rhetoric. They studied Greek masters like Demosthenes and practiced endlessly, memorizing speeches, debating mock cases, and performing exercises known as declamations. This rigorous training instilled a deep appreciation, and often an addictive devotion, to the art of persuasive speech. For them, the mastery of language was an ultimate form of intellectual power, a high that transcended mere physical achievement. The stakes were incredibly high. In Roman courts, an eloquent speech could win a crucial lawsuit, save a client from exile or death, or elevate an advocate's reputation, opening doors to political advancement. In the Senate, a powerful orator could sway crucial votes, forge alliances, or bring down a political rival. You realize that a single well-placed word, delivered with perfect timing and conviction, could change the course of a man's life, or even the destiny of the Republic. This profound influence was the ultimate drug for many Roman intellectuals. The competition was fierce and often brutal. Orators would dissect each other's speeches, finding logical flaws, rhetorical weaknesses, and opportunities for scathing personal attacks. The verbal sparring was as intense as any gladiatorial contest, but fought with intellect rather than steel. You'd witness men tearing each other apart with words, their arguments sharp as daggers, their wit cutting to the bone. This intellectual combat, the thrill of dismantling an opponent's argument, was a powerful, addictive game for the Roman mind. The Roman addiction to rhetoric wasn't just confined to formal settings. It permeated daily life. Educated Romans delighted in philosophical discussions, in debates about moral dilemmas, in the skillful exchange of witty repartee. You might find yourself at a banquet, listening to two senators engage in a spirited, yet civil, debate on the nature of justice or the merits of a new law, each trying to outmaneuver the other with logic and elegant phrasing. The pursuit of intellectual superiority, the joy of verbal victory, was a constant, underlying current in their social interactions. Figures like Cicero, arguably Rome's greatest orator, personified this addiction. His life was a testament to the power of words. He rose from an obscure family to become a consul, commanding immense influence through his eloquence. His speeches are still studied today, not just for their historical content, but for their rhetorical brilliance. He was addicted to the power he wielded with his voice, and this addiction ultimately cost him his life when his political enemies, fearing his persuasive abilities, had him executed and his hands, which had penned his powerful words, publicly displayed. Even emperors, though possessing absolute power, understood and often engaged in rhetoric or at least appreciated it. Augustus carefully crafted his public image through speeches and propaganda. Hadrian was known for his intellectual pursuits and debates. The respect for eloquence, even among rulers, highlights the deep-seated cultural reverence and collective addiction to the art of persuasion. The Roman obsession with rhetoric also influenced their literature and education. Children would study famous speeches, analyzing their structure and devices. Poets would strive for rhetorical flourish in their verses. Historians would craft their narratives with an eye towards persuasive impact. You realize that the very way Romans thought, wrote, and communicated was deeply shaped by this pervasive, almost spiritual devotion to the spoken word. As you step away from the echoing halls of Roman oratory, you might find yourself reflecting on the power of your own words. In your modern world, soundbites and fleeting social media posts often dominate public discourse. But for the Romans, language was a craft, a weapon, a source of profound intellectual pleasure, and an undeniable addiction. The thrill of debate, the satisfaction of a perfectly articulated argument, the sheer power of swaying an audience. These were highs that few other pursuits could match. You might still hear the ghost of a Roman orator's voice, resonating through the ages, a testament to the enduring, addictive allure of rhetorical mastery. Let's shift our focus now to a quieter, more personal, yet equally consuming Roman addiction: the insatiable urge to collect. Forget your neatly categorized hobbies or carefully curated displays. You are about to enter a world where the acquisition of rare, beautiful, or simply unusual objects became a profound obsession, a form of intellectual and aesthetic craving that bordered on compulsive hoarding for the Roman elite. The air in these private collections isn't just dusty, it's steeped in history, rarity, and the tangible weight of countless prized possessions. Imagine yourself in the bibliotheca or tablinum, library or study, of a wealthy Roman collector. This isn't just a room, it's a meticulously arranged treasury of objects. Shelves groan under the weight of papyrus scrolls, some ancient Greek texts, some rare Roman manuscripts. Cabinets display an astonishing array of small, precious items. Intricately carved gems, rare coins, delicate bronzes, and exotic curiosities from the furthest reaches of the empire. The silence is profound, broken only by the soft rustle of your tunic and the occasional creak of aged wood. The addiction here is multifaceted. An addiction to beauty, to rarity, to knowledge, and fundamentally to ownership. For the Roman elite, collecting was a sophisticated pursuit, a mark of cultured refinement, but it also often spiraled into an obsessive quest to possess the unique, the ancient, or the simply awe-inspiring. It was a way to display not just wealth, but taste, education, and connections. You'd observe a collector carefully handling a delicate Greek vase, its black figures gleaming against the red clay, perhaps a piece from a renowned master. His touch is reverent, his eyes gleaming with pride. For him, this isn't just pottery, it's a piece of history, a work of genius, a tangible link to a celebrated culture. The thrill of acquisition, the joy of possessing something rare and beautiful, was a powerful, almost intoxicating experience. Consider the obsession with Greek art. After conquering Greece, Romans became avid collectors of Greek statues, paintings, and bronzes. Many were outright looted from temples and public spaces and brought to Rome. If originals weren't available, skilled Greek craftsmen were employed to create copies. The desire to own a piece of Greek culture, to bring its beauty and intellectual prestige into one's home, became a driving force for many wealthy Romans. You'd see entire villas transformed into private museums, filled with a bewildering array of sculptures and frescoes, creating an atmosphere of cultivated luxury. The collecting extended to less obvious areas. Coins, for example. Numismatics, the study and collection of coins, was a popular pursuit. You'd find collections spanning centuries, from the earliest Republican issues to the latest imperial coinage, each coin a tiny piece of history, a miniature work of art. The collector would delight in identifying the emperors, the mythical figures, the historical events depicted on these small metal discs. The meticulous cataloging, the careful display, the thrill of finding a rare specimen, these were all aspects of a quiet, intellectual addiction. Books and scrolls were another major focus. Private libraries were a hallmark of wealth and education. You'd see countless scrolls, each carefully rolled and stored in pigeonholes or chests, often labeled with tags, ***, indicating their contents. To possess a complete collection of a famous author or a rare philosophical treatise was a source of immense pride. The pursuit of knowledge, the ownership of literary treasures, was a powerful draw for the Roman intellectual. Beyond the aesthetic and intellectual, there was also the collection of mirabilia, curiosities, strange and wonderful objects from the known world. Exotic animal parts, unusual minerals, strange artifacts from newly conquered lands, these would be displayed in special cabinets, sparking conversation and awe among guests. This was a form of collecting that verged on the eccentric, driven by a desire for the novel, the unique, and the conversation starting. You might even see collections of rare plants in meticulously manicured gardens, or unusual species of fish in elaborate ponds, reflecting an obsession with collecting living curiosities. The amount of effort and expense involved in acquiring and maintaining these collections, from dispatching agents to distant lands to employing skilled curators and gardeners, was immense. This wasn't a cheap hobby, it was an investment, a passion, and often an expensive addiction. The psychology of this addiction is fascinating. It wasn't just about ownership, it was about the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of acquiring something elusive, the intellectual pleasure of understanding its history and significance. For some, it might have been a way to fill an emotional void, a substitute for deeper connections. For others, it was a display of cultural superiority, a testament to their refined taste and access to resources. Emperors, too, were often fervent collectors. Hadrian, known for his love of Greek culture, filled his sprawling villa at Tivoli with copies of Greek masterpieces and unique architectural elements. Augustus was known for his extensive library. Their collecting habits set a trend, legitimizing and elevating the pursuit for the wider elite. Roman moralists, ever critical of excess, often condemned luxuria in collecting, especially the hoarding of items for mere display rather than utility. They bemoaned the expense, the obsession with foreign goods, and the perceived decline of traditional Roman values of practicality. Yet, despite these criticisms, the urge to collect, to accumulate, to possess, remained a powerful, addictive force. As you gaze upon these ancient collections, you might feel a pang of recognition. The human desire to gather, to categorize, to own objects that hold meaning or beauty, is timeless. For the Romans, this addiction to collecting was a profound expression of their culture, their aspirations, and their personal obsessions. It was a quieter form of craving than the roar of the circus or the gluttony of a banquet, but no less potent, a deep-seated urge to surround themselves with the material manifestations of history, beauty, and their own cultivated prestige. You might still detect a faint scent of old papyrus and polished bronze, a ghost of a Roman hoarder's passion. Let's now turn our attention to a more ethereal, yet profoundly pervasive Roman addiction, the insatiable craving for divination, for omens, and for understanding the will of the gods. Forget your rational, scientific worldview. You are about to step into a society where every creak of a door, every flight of birds, every flash of lightning, could be interpreted as a divine message, where the pursuit of foreknowledge became an all-consuming, often anxious, obsession. The air in Rome isn't just filled with the sounds of daily life, it's thick with an undercurrent of spiritual anxiety, of desperate hope, and the pervasive whisper of superstition. Imagine yourself waking in a Roman home, not in your calm bedroom, but amidst a family preparing for a significant event, a wedding, a long journey, or an important business deal. Before any major undertaking, the first concern is always the auspices. You see the father of the family, the paterfamilias, looking out at the sky, his brow furrowed with concern. He's not checking the weather. He's looking for birds, specifically for their flight patterns, their calls, their species. The addiction here is to certainty, to control over an unpredictable world, and to the psychological comfort of believing one is aligned with divine will. For the Romans, the gods were not abstract concepts. They were active, often capricious, players in human affairs. To ignore their signs was to invite disaster. This profound belief system, though often dismissed as mere superstition, formed a deep-seated, almost pathological addiction to seeking and interpreting omens. You'd witness the ubiquitous role of the augurs, priests whose sole job was to interpret the will of the gods, primarily through observing the flight and feeding patterns of birds. Their pronouncements could delay assemblies, postpone military campaigns, or even halt elections. You realize the immense power these interpreters held, and how deeply ingrained this practice was in Roman public life. For you, it might seem absurd. For them, it was an absolute necessity, a vital form of guidance. Beyond the official augurs, private divination was also rampant. You might encounter a Roman consulting a haruspex, an Etruscan priest who would examine the entrails of sacrificed animals, particularly the liver, to read omens. The gruesome ritual, the careful dissection of organs, the pronouncements based on perceived anomalies, these were all part of a desperate attempt to peer into the future, to gain an advantage or to avert disaster. The smell of burning sacrifices, of entrails, would be strong in certain parts of the city. The quest for signs extended to nearly everything. The barking of a dog, the tripping of a horse, a sudden sneeze, a dream, all could be interpreted as omens, good or bad. You'd hear Romans recounting their dreams to others, anxiously seeking interpretation, or sharing stories of strange occurrences that foretold future events. This constant search for meaning, this relentless interpretation of every mundane event as a divine message, highlights the pervasive nature of their addiction to foreknowledge. Consider the role of oracles. While the famous Oracle of Delphi was Greek, the Romans also consulted various prophetic sources and individuals. You'd hear tales of desperate individuals traveling great distances to consult a sibyl or a local seer, hoping for a glimpse of their fate, a solution to their problems, or reassurance about their choices. The human desire to know what lies ahead, to remove uncertainty, is a powerful, addictive force. The addiction to superstition often led to intense anxiety. If an unfavorable omen was observed, the rituals had to be repeated, the prayers offered again until a positive sign was received. This could lead to endless delays, to a crippling paralysis of decision-making, all driven by the fear of divine displeasure. You can imagine the stress of a Roman general, his army ready for battle, but held back by an unfavorable omen, his men growing restless, his own confidence wavering, all due to the flight of a bird. Emperors, despite their immense power, were often deeply superstitious. Augustus, a pragmatic ruler, meticulously recorded his dreams and wore an amulet against lightning. Tiberius was reportedly a keen astrologer. Domitian, notorious for his cruelty, was obsessed with omens and prophecies, living in constant fear of assassination, which was paradoxically foretold to him. Their addiction to divination, even in the face of logic, demonstrates the deep psychological hold of these beliefs. Even the everyday practice of magic or magia played into this addiction. While officially condemned, it was widely practiced. You'd find depictions, curse tablets, made of lead or bronze, inscribed with curses and nailed to walls or buried in graves, attempting to influence events through supernatural means. Love charms, protective amulets, and potions for various purposes were bought and sold. This clandestine pursuit of supernatural advantage, this belief in the power to manipulate fate, was another facet of the Roman addiction to control through the mystical. The Roman calendar itself was a testament to this obsession. Certain days were fasti, favorable for public business, others nefasti, unfavorable, determined by complex augural calculations. You couldn't simply conduct business on any day, you had to consult the divine calendar, another layer of ritual and superstition that governed their lives. As you consider the spell of Roman superstition, you realize the profound difference in worldview. Your world relies on data, science, and rational planning. Theirs relied on a constant dialogue with the divine, a desperate search for meaning in every rustle of leaves, every flash of lightning. This addiction to omens and oracles was not just about belief, it was about coping with the terrifying unpredictability of life, a constant, anxious quest for reassurance and control in a world governed by unseen forces. You might feel a chill as you contemplate the heavy weight of fate and divine will that once hung over every Roman, shaping their decisions, their fears, and their unending search for a sign. Let's now turn our attention to an addiction on a colossal scale, one etched in stone and visible across the millennia: Rome's insatiable craving for monumental architecture. Forget your functional modern buildings. You are about to witness a society driven by an almost manic compulsion to build, to expand, to create structures that were not just utilitarian, but profound statements of power, engineering prowess, and an unshakable belief in their own eternal glory. The air here isn't just dusty, it's filled with the ceaseless sounds of construction. Hammers ringing, stone being chiseled, the creak of cranes, and the rhythmic shouts of countless laborers. Imagine yourself standing in the heart of Rome during its imperial zenith, perhaps under Augustus or Hadrian. You are not just in a city, you are in a vast, sprawling construction site. Every direction you turn, you see cranes lifting massive blocks of marble, armies of workers toiling, and new temples, aqueducts, forums, and amphitheaters rising from the ground. The sheer scale of the building activity is astounding, a testament to an empire utterly addicted to leaving its indelible mark on the landscape. The addiction here is to legacy, to permanence, to the physical manifestation of power and achievement. For emperors, senators, and wealthy patrons, commissioning grand buildings was the ultimate display of their influence, their generosity, and their desire to be remembered for eternity. It was an addiction to glory, to the idea that their names would be forever associated with magnificent structures that served the Roman people. You'd observe the astonishing engineering feats. The Romans mastered concrete, allowing them to create massive vaulted ceilings and domes, structures that defied previous architectural limitations. They built miles of aqueducts, bringing fresh water to their cities, not just as functional systems but as elegant, soaring arches that marched across the landscape. Roads, bridges, harbors, all built with a robust efficiency and an aesthetic sense that still impress today. You realize the immense organizational power required to mobilize such resources, such labor, all driven by this pervasive building mania. Consider the Forum Romanum, the beating heart of Rome. Over centuries, it was constantly being rebuilt, expanded, and adorned with new temples, basilicas, and triumphal arches. You walk among the ruins today and see layers of history, each building project reflecting a different emperor's ambition, a different senator's desire for glory. The competition was fierce. Each new structure had to be grander, more ornate, more impressive than the last, fueling an endless cycle of construction. The addiction extended beyond Rome itself. Throughout the vast empire, wherever the Romans established a city, they built. Amphitheaters rose in Gaul, baths in Britain, temples in Egypt, and triumphal arches in North Africa. These structures weren't just for Roman citizens. They were symbols of Romanization, visible proof of the empire's reach and its enduring presence. You'd see communities eagerly adopting Roman architectural styles, constructing their own forums and temples, often funded by local elites eager to emulate the imperial capital and demonstrate their loyalty. For the common Roman, these buildings were a source of immense civic pride. To walk through the Forum of Trajan with its colossal column depicting his Dacian victories, or to gaze upon the newly completed Pantheon, its massive dome and engineering marvel, would instill a profound sense of awe and belonging. You realize that the very physical landscape of Rome, constantly evolving and expanding through building, was a constant reinforcement of their collective identity and their belief in their own unmatched greatness. This civic pride, too, was an addiction, a powerful, unifying force. The cost of this addiction was staggering. Vast sums of money were poured into construction projects, often fueled by the spoils of war or the immense wealth generated by the empire. Entire armies of slaves and skilled laborers were mobilized, their lives dedicated to the painstaking work of quarrying, transporting, carving, and assembling massive blocks of stone. You can almost feel the calloused hands of the masons, the sweat of the laborers, the immense human effort embedded in every polished marble surface. Emperors were perhaps the most addicted to this form of self-glorification. Augustus famously boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, a testament to his prolific building program. Hadrian, a true architectural enthusiast, personally designed many of his projects, including the Pantheon and his sprawling villa at Tivoli. For these rulers, building was synonymous with ruling, a tangible expression of their power and their vision for the empire. Their addiction was to leaving a permanent, glorious imprint on the world. Even in moments of crisis, the urge to build persisted. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, Nero seized the opportunity to rebuild large swathes of the city, including his magnificent Domus Aurea, sparking outrage but also demonstrating an unyielding commitment to architectural grandeur. The destruction was immediately followed by a furious burst of construction, almost as if the city had to heal itself by building anew. Roman moralists, ever critical of excess, often condemned luxuria in collecting, especially the hoarding of items for mere display rather than utility. They bemoaned the expense, the obsession with foreign goods, and the perceived decline of traditional Roman values of practicality. Yet, despite these criticisms, the urge to collect, to accumulate, to possess, remained a powerful, addictive force. As you gaze upon these ancient collections, you might feel a pang of recognition. The human desire to gather, to categorize, to own objects that hold meaning or beauty, is timeless. For the Romans, this addiction to collecting was a profound expression of their culture, their aspirations, and their personal obsessions. It was a quieter form of craving than the roar of the circus or the gluttony of a banquet, but no less potent, a deep-seated urge to surround themselves with the material manifestations of history, beauty, and their own cultivated prestige. You might still detect a faint scent of old papyrus and polished bronze, a ghost of a Roman hoarder's passion. Let's now turn our attention to a more ethereal, yet profoundly pervasive Roman addiction: the insatiable craving for divination, for omens, and for understanding the will of the gods. Forget your rational, scientific worldview. You are about to step into a society where every creak of a door, every flight of birds, every flash of lightning, could be interpreted as a divine message, where the pursuit of foreknowledge became an all-consuming, often anxious, obsession. The air in Rome isn't just filled with the sounds of daily life. It's thick with an undercurrent of spiritual anxiety, of desperate hope, and the pervasive whisper of superstition. Imagine yourself waking in a Roman home, not in your calm bedroom, but amidst a family preparing for a significant event: a wedding, a long journey, or an important business deal. Before any major undertaking, the first concern is always the auspices. You see the father of the family, the paterfamilias, looking out at the sky, his brow furrowed with concern. He's not checking the weather. He's looking for birds, specifically for their flight patterns, their calls, their species. The addiction here is to certainty, to control over an unpredictable world, and to the psychological comfort of believing one is aligned with divine will. For the Romans, the gods were not abstract concepts. They were active, often capricious, players in human affairs. To ignore their signs was to invite disaster. This profound belief system, though often dismissed as mere superstition, formed a deep-seated, almost pathological addiction to seeking and interpreting omens. You'd witness the ubiquitous role of the augurs, priests whose sole job was to interpret the will of the gods, primarily through observing the flight and feeding patterns of birds. Their pronouncements could delay assemblies, postpone military campaigns, or even halt elections. You realize the immense power these interpreters held, and how deeply ingrained this practice was in Roman public life. For you, it might seem absurd. For them, it was an absolute necessity, a vital form of guidance. Beyond the official augurs, private divination was also rampant. You might encounter a Roman consulting a haruspice, an Etruscan priest who would examine the entrails of sacrificed animals, particularly the liver, to read omens. The gruesome ritual, the careful dissection of organs, the pronouncements based on perceived anomalies, these were all part of a desperate attempt to peer into the future, to gain an advantage or to avert disaster. The smell of burning sacrifices, of entrails, would be strong in certain parts of the city. The quest for signs extended to nearly everything. The barking of a dog, the tripping of a horse, a sudden sneeze, a dream, all could be interpreted as omens, good or bad. You'd hear Romans recounting their dreams to others, anxiously seeking interpretation, or sharing stories of strange occurrences that foretold future events. This constant search for meaning, this relentless interpretation of every mundane event as a divine message, highlights the pervasive nature of their addiction to foreknowledge. Consider the role of oracles. While the famous Oracle of Delphi was Greek, the Romans also consulted various prophetic sources and individuals. You'd hear tales of desperate individuals traveling great distances to consult a sibyl or a local seer, hoping for a glimpse of their fate, a solution to their problems, or reassurance about their choices. The human desire to know what lies ahead, to remove uncertainty, is a powerful, addictive force. The addiction to superstition often led to intense anxiety. If an unfavorable omen was observed, the rituals had to be repeated, the prayers offered again until a positive sign was received. This could lead to endless delays, to a crippling paralysis of decision-making, all driven by the fear of divine displeasure. You can imagine the stress of a Roman general, his army ready for battle, but held back by an unfavorable omen, his men growing restless, his own confidence wavering, all due to the flight of a bird. Emperors, despite their immense power, were often deeply superstitious. Augustus, a pragmatic ruler, meticulously recorded his dreams and wore an amulet against lightning. Tiberius was reportedly a keen astrologer. Domitian, notorious for his cruelty, was obsessed with omens and prophecies, living in constant fear of assassination, which was paradoxically foretold to him. Their addiction to divination, even in the face of logic, demonstrates the deep psychological hold of these beliefs. Even the everyday practice of magic or magia played into this addiction. While officially condemned, it was widely practiced. You'd find depictions, curse tablets, made of lead or bronze, inscribed with curses and nailed to walls or buried in graves, attempting to influence events through supernatural means. Love charms, protective amulets, and potions for various purposes were bought and sold. This clandestine pursuit of supernatural advantage, this belief in the power to manipulate fate, was another facet of the Roman addiction to control through the mystical. Roman moralists, ever critical of excess, often condemned luxuria in collecting, especially the hoarding of items for mere display rather than utility. They bemoaned the expense, the obsession with foreign goods, and the perceived decline of traditional Roman values of practicality. Yet, despite these criticisms, the urge to collect, to accumulate, to possess, remained a powerful, addictive force. As you gaze upon these ancient collections, you might feel a pang of recognition. The human desire to gather, to categorize, to own objects that hold meaning or beauty, is timeless. For the Romans, this addiction to collecting was a profound expression of their culture, their aspirations, and their personal obsessions. It was a quieter form of craving than the roar of the circus or the gluttony of a banquet, but no less potent, a deep-seated urge to surround themselves with the material manifestations of history, beauty, and their own cultivated prestige. You might still detect a faint scent of old papyrus and polished bronze, a ghost of a Roman hoarder's passion. Let's now turn our attention to a more ethereal, yet profoundly pervasive Roman addiction, the insatiable craving for divination, for omens, and for understanding the will of the gods. Forget your rational, scientific worldview. You are about to step into a society where every creak of a door, every flight of birds, every flash of lightning, could be interpreted as a divine message, where the pursuit of foreknowledge became an all-consuming, often anxious, obsession. The air in Rome isn't just filled with the sounds of daily life, it's thick with an undercurrent of spiritual anxiety, of desperate hope, and the pervasive whisper of superstition. Imagine yourself waking in a Roman home, not in your calm bedroom, but amidst a family preparing for a significant event, a wedding, a long journey, or an important business deal. Before any major undertaking, the first concern is always the auspices. You see the father of the family, the paterfamilias, looking out at the sky, his brow furrowed with concern. He's not checking the weather. He's looking for birds specifically for their flight patterns, their calls, their species. The addiction here is to certainty, to control over an unpredictable world, and to the psychological comfort of believing one is aligned with divine will. For the Romans, the gods were not abstract concepts. They were active, often capricious, players in human affairs. To ignore their signs was to invite disaster. This profound belief system, though often dismissed as mere superstition, formed a deep-seated, almost pathological addiction to seeking and interpreting omens. You'd witness the ubiquitous role of the augurs, priests whose sole job was to interpret the will of the gods, primarily through observing the flight and feeding patterns of birds. Their pronouncements could delay assemblies, postpone military campaigns, or even halt elections. You realize the immense power these interpreters held, and how deeply ingrained this practice was in Roman public life. For you, it might seem absurd. For them, it was an absolute necessity, a vital form of guidance. Beyond the official augurs, private divination was also rampant. You might encounter a Roman consulting a haruspex, an Etruscan priest who would examine the entrails of sacrificed animals, particularly the liver, to read omens. The gruesome ritual, the careful dissection of organs, the pronouncements based on perceived anomalies, these were all part of a desperate attempt to peer into the future, to gain an advantage or to avert disaster. The smell of burning sacrifices, of entrails, would be strong in certain parts of the city. The quest for signs extended to nearly everything. The barking of a dog, the tripping of a horse, a sudden sneeze, a dream, all could be interpreted as omens, good or bad. You'd hear Romans recounting their dreams to others, anxiously seeking interpretation, or sharing stories of strange occurrences that foretold future events. This constant search for meaning, this relentless interpretation of every mundane event as a divine message, highlights the pervasive nature of their addiction to foreknowledge. Consider the role of oracles. While the famous Oracle of Delphi was Greek, the Romans also consulted various prophetic sources and individuals. You'd hear tales of desperate individuals traveling great distances to consult a sibyl or a local seer, hoping for a glimpse of their fate, a solution to their problems, or reassurance about their choices. The human desire to know what lies ahead, to remove uncertainty, is a powerful, addictive force. The addiction to superstition often led to intense anxiety. If an unfavorable omen was observed, the rituals had to be repeated, the prayers offered again until a positive sign was received. This could lead to endless delays, to a crippling paralysis of decision-making, all driven by the fear of divine displeasure. You can imagine the stress of a Roman general, his army ready for battle, but held back by an unfavorable omen, his men growing restless, his own confidence wavering, all due to the flight of a bird. Emperors, despite their immense power, were often deeply superstitious. Augustus, a pragmatic ruler, meticulously recorded his dreams and wore an amulet against lightning. Tiberius was reportedly a keen astrologer. Domitian, notorious for his cruelty, was obsessed with omens and prophecies, living in constant fear of assassination, which was paradoxically foretold to him. Their addiction to divination, even in the face of logic, demonstrates the deep psychological hold of these beliefs. Even the everyday practice of magic or magia played into this addiction. While officially condemned, it was widely practiced. You'd find depictions, curse tablets, made of lead or bronze, inscribed with curses and nailed to walls or buried in graves, attempting to influence events through supernatural means. Love charms, protective amulets, and potions for various purposes were bought and sold. This clandestine pursuit of supernatural advantage, this belief in the power to manipulate fate, was another facet of the Roman addiction to control through the mystical. Roman moralists, ever critical of excess, often condemned luxuria in collecting, especially the hoarding of items for mere display rather than utility. They bemoaned the expense, the obsession with foreign goods, and the perceived decline of traditional Roman values of practicality. Yet, despite these criticisms, the urge to collect, to accumulate, to possess, remained a powerful, addictive force. As you gaze upon these ancient collections, you might feel a pang of recognition. The human desire to gather, to categorize, to own objects that hold meaning or beauty, is timeless. For the Romans, this addiction to collecting was a profound expression of their culture, their aspirations, and their personal obsessions. It was a quieter form of craving than the roar of the circus or the gluttony of a banquet, but no less potent, a deep-seated urge to surround themselves with the material manifestations of history, beauty, and their own cultivated prestige. You might still detect a faint scent of old papyrus and polished bronze, a ghost of a Roman hoarder's passion. Let's now turn our attention to a more ethereal, yet profoundly pervasive Roman addiction: the insatiable craving for divination, for omens, and for understanding the will of the gods. Forget your rational, scientific worldview. You are about to step into a society where every creak of a door, every flight of birds, every flash of lightning, could be interpreted as a divine message, where the pursuit of foreknowledge became an all-consuming, often anxious, obsession. The air in Rome isn't just filled with the sounds of daily life. It's thick with an undercurrent of spiritual anxiety, of desperate hope, and the pervasive whisper of superstition. Imagine yourself waking in a Roman home, not in your calm bedroom, but amidst a family preparing for a significant event, a wedding, a long journey, or an important business deal. Before any major undertaking, the first concern is always the auspices. You see the father of the family, the paterfamilias, looking out at the sky, his brow furrowed with concern. He's not checking the weather. He's looking for birds, specifically for their flight patterns, their calls, their species. The addiction here is to certainty, to control over an unpredictable world, and to the psychological comfort of believing one is aligned with divine will. For the Romans, the gods were not abstract concepts. They were active, often capricious, players in human affairs. To ignore their signs was to invite disaster. This profound belief system, though often dismissed as mere superstition, formed a deep-seated, almost pathological addiction to seeking and interpreting omens. You'd witness the ubiquitous role of the augurs, priests whose sole job was to interpret the will of the gods, primarily through observing the flight and feeding patterns of birds. Their pronouncements could delay assemblies, postpone military campaigns, or even halt elections. You realize the immense power these interpreters held, and how deeply ingrained this practice was in Roman public life. For you, it might seem absurd. For them, it was an absolute necessity, a vital form of guidance. Beyond the official augurs, private divination was also rampant. You might encounter a Roman consulting a haruspice, an Etruscan priest who would examine the entrails of sacrificed animals, particularly the liver, to read omens. The gruesome ritual, the careful dissection of organs, the pronouncements based on perceived anomalies, these were all part of a desperate attempt to peer into the future, to gain an advantage or to avert disaster. The smell of burning sacrifices, of entrails, would be strong in certain parts of the city. The quest for signs extended to nearly everything. The barking of a dog, the tripping of a horse, a sudden sneeze, a dream, all could be interpreted as omens, good or bad. You'd hear Romans recounting their dreams to others, anxiously seeking interpretation, or sharing stories of strange occurrences that foretold future events. This constant search for meaning, this relentless interpretation of every mundane event as a divine message, highlights the pervasive nature of their addiction to foreknowledge. Consider the role of oracles. While the famous Oracle of Delphi was Greek, the Romans also consulted various prophetic sources and individuals. You'd hear tales of desperate individuals traveling great distances to consult a sibyl or a local seer, hoping for a glimpse of their fate, a solution to their problems, or reassurance about their choices. The human desire to know what lies ahead, to remove uncertainty, is a powerful, addictive force. The addiction to superstition often led to intense anxiety. If an unfavorable omen was observed, The rituals had to be repeated, the prayers offered again until a positive sign was received. This could lead to endless delays, to a crippling paralysis of decision-making, all driven by the fear of divine displeasure. You can imagine the stress of a Roman general, his army ready for battle, but held back by an unfavorable omen, his men growing restless, his own confidence wavering, all due to the flight of a bird. Emperors, despite their immense power, were often deeply superstitious. Augustus, a pragmatic ruler, meticulously recorded his dreams and wore an amulet against lightning. Tiberius was reportedly a keen astrologer. Domitian, notorious for his cruelty, was obsessed with omens and prophecies, living in constant fear of assassination, which was paradoxically foretold to him. Their addiction to divination, even in the face of logic, demonstrates the deep psychological hold of these beliefs. Even the everyday practice of magic or magia played into this addiction. While officially condemned, it was widely practiced. You'd find depictions, cursed tablets, made of lead or bronze, inscribed with curses and nailed to walls or buried in graves, attempting to influence events through supernatural means. Love charms, protective amulets, and potions for various purposes were bought and sold. This clandestine pursuit of supernatural advantage, this belief in the power to manipulate fate, was another facet of the Roman addiction to control through the mystical.